The marketing wizards at Square had a major light bulb moment when it came to translating Makai Tushi Saga into English. Tack the Final Fantasy name on the front. It wasn't a great stretch to pass it off, granted, there are plenty of similarities between this and the first couple of Final Fantasy NES titles. However, it proved to be a great move, as the first title in a super strong list of Game Boy RPGs would also become the first in the unbelievable list of million sellers for Square. The adventure follows 4 customizable characters who attempt to reach paradise via a tower at the center of the world. There are 4 worlds to traverse in total, each with a sub-quest to obtain magical spheres in some way which allow passage to the next world. The game is replayable depending on the character choices, and although there is no immediately obvious leveling up system, each character has a unique stat improvement arc to take. There are 3 classes, the first and most obvious choice being humans, male or female. The gender makes little difference. Humans' stats don't improve after battles, you need to buy potions to raise them. You can buy HP boosts, an attack, defense, and agility increases. The amount these potions work is strangely random. Sometimes you get 20 HP, sometimes 1, so the less honest of you can save exploit. Of course, stats can be improved by equipping new weapons and armor. Humans are the most versatile in this area, they can equip most weapons in the game. Also, all characters have 8 slots into which all armor, weapons, skills, and spells need to be allocated. And humans are the only characters to have all 8 slots open. Mutants, on the other hand, have 4 slots pre-allocated for mutant skills. These are seemingly random skills that improve or decrease depending on how you use the characters. 4 slots can still be used to wear armor or equip spells and weapons. The skills are where the power of this class lies. There are skills that lower the stats of enemies, raise a defensive barrier across your team, or, particularly useful, an ESP skill that can prevent the damage from the next attack occurring. These are random, though, and seem to appear and disappear on an RNG whim. Similarly, the stats increase after battles, but somewhat randomly. It could be that the stat changes are down to the activity of the characters in battle. Use a magic spell and your mana increases. Take damage and your defense increases, and so on. It's certainly an interesting mechanic, and mutants form a key part of your squad. The third class is probably the most curious of the 3. Monsters may seem weak at first, and certainly they're the hardest characters to use. However, upon defeating enemies, occasionally meat can drop. For instance, the game will produce meat of skeleton, I'm serious, and ask you whether you want to eat it. For humans and mutants, nothing happens, but monsters can morph into various forms depending on the type of meat. Consuming the flesh of bosses makes you particularly strong, so it's worth sticking with these characters until you get further in. It's a very cool addition to the game. The overall look of the game, especially in the overworld, is very simplistic and generic. Everything is square, no pun intended, and angular. There's very little texture to look at. The enemies look sinister, and there's some enjoyable battle animation. But when you're walking around, expect to see the same handful of tiles. The music is by one Nobuo Uematsu, and while it doesn't represent his best work, it's still a wonderful accompaniment to an early 8-bit adventure. The dialogue is noticeably stunted throughout because, as commonplace with earlier games, the space allowed for text boxes was not changed. This meant translators had to fit the English into the same amount of character space as the original Japanese, which doesn't work. It's possible to say much more with a Japanese character than the equivalent number of English letters, so very often the story is shoehorned into place. It's a shame because, as games like Link's Awakening and Pokémon proved, captivating and expressive stories can be morphed from the original tongue. Use your imagination, though, and you can get past this. Final Fantasy was not the only series to suffer from this in the early years. The story has its fair share of RPG cliches, but will grab your attention, and it's certainly not dragged out. There's not much walking around, so the tale progresses nicely. Is this the greatest RPG on the system? Of course not. It's probably not even in the top 3. It's an enthralling tale, though, and despite its rudimentary visage, is Wholly playable and enjoyable, with just enough uniqueness to make it treasurable for any JRPG fan.